So hello everybody, you're very welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and I make videos about the law. And today we're talking about FE1 Criminal Law. I just updated the 2025 Criminal Law ebook and I have some tips on how to pass the exam, albeit the pass rate in this exam is very, very high. The examiner is a pure dote, as we would say. Shane Cummins, such a dote. He was my evidence law lecturer in UCC and then he moved to UL and that's where he is now. Brilliant lecturer in law, and yeah, he's very generous in his exam reports. He's also very generous in terms of grades, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand. But there's still a knack to doing the criminal law exam. It's quite broad. There's a lot to remember. So that's what we're going to go through today. I'm also going to look at the March and October 2024 papers. That's what I've been doing in all of these 2025 kind of update videos. So yeah, I've made a list of things that I've kind of noticed are handy in terms of criminal law. So the first one is just mastering the fundamentals, and when I say that I mean understand intention and the breakdown of mens rea and actus reus. They're so foundational to murder, manslaughter and strict liability. And strict liability, we'll talk about that later. It's very, very important in terms of its nuances, particularly the principles from CCV Ireland. As well as that, I would say another thing you really need to know very, very well is the classification of offences, criminal offences under Irish law. So the difference between minor and serious and summary versus indictable, and where they're tried, and the role of the DPP in all of that. The other thing I think you cannot not address, aside from your substantive legislation like non-offences against the person, non-fatal offences against the person Act 97, public order offences, those kind of things. Aside from that legislation, the other thing you cannot leave out is defences. The defences is so important as a mitigant when you are discussing criminal liability. And when I say defences, I'm talking about provocation, automatism, self-defence, intoxication, insanity. Self-defence in particular, there's an objective and subjective test, and I would say provocation as well as a partial defence of reducing murder to manslaughter, especially staying up to date with the recent case law around self-defence, for example the 2024 Crawford decision, and staying up to date with strict liability. I would say the biggest mover in that would be environmental law, and just keeping an eye on it. The law firms always do a really good job discussing that. The next big area then I would say is like understanding your hybrid or inchoate offences. So know the distinction between, as I said before, summary, indictable and hybrid. I think I already said that. And then there's a whole chapter on inchoate liability, and when I say that I mean attempt, conspiracy, incitement with the relevant case law. When it comes to case law as well, like be very strategic in your application. There's so much case law in criminal law. You have to kind of pick the heavy hitters. So like People DPP v McLaughlin for inferring intent from conduct. Barnes, People DPP v Barnes is very good for self-defence. Or v Woolen for indirect intention. There's just certain cases that stick out. And then in the same vein, you know, your case law, it interprets, it colours, it forms the basis of your argument for criminal liability or a defence in the same way that legislation does. So make sure you know everything. I have set it out in my ebook around the non-fatal offences against the Person Act 97 just particularly section 3, section 4. Yeah, and then I would say when it comes to like tactics when solving a problem, like the first thing you need to do is identify what the issue is. So intent, causation, is there a defense? Cite your statutes if there are some, and case law to support your arguments. Look at each party's liability and describe it. Describe how the facts lead to an offence. That is how you master criminal law. Just very quickly, looking at the March 2024 paper. The first question was a problem question based on the People v. Dean Haig. That was sexual assault. And you kind of need to know that previously it was known as indecent assault and the case law around that. And also there's a good case of DPP v. FN around the ambiguity of whether, must the prosecution prove an intention to commit an assault, but also that the intent to commit one was indecent. That's quite good there. And basically what they're saying is that in certain cases a sexual motive must be proven, and know when. And then you would also look at section 15 of the NFOP 97 because there was a false imprisonment here as well. Question 2 is also a problem question. There is just a vicious attack on a child. It's quite muddy, the factual, but there's a lot of causation here. Initially though, it's serious assault, common design, and then there's the defense of insanity. Question 3 then was an essay question around omissions liability, based on Joel and Costin. Question 4 then was a problem question. It was based loosely on R.V. Abdullahi, which was a syringe offence. And then there was a defence as well of automatism. And there was manslaughter. Question 5 then is the usual you are a solicitor question, and in this one you have to explain detention without charge, and then you also have to talk about inferences from silence and the usual case law that goes along with that. Question 6 then is, just remember that coercive control isn't actually on the curriculum, so don't worry about that. He's just using it as an example of an offence in a legislation. What you need to concentrate is what you're asked in A and B. The first one is, as I already discussed, the classification of offences, making the distinction between summary and indictable. So you're being asked there straight out. And then the second one then relates to the previous conviction of assault and bail, and the conditions of bail. So, it's always going to be fairly general what you're asked. You're never going to be asked about a specific piece of legislation. It's always going to be in the context of a problem question. Question 7 then is a list of 4 charges that the DPP need advice on, and they range from aggravated burglary, theft, robbery, making a gain, or causing a loss by deception, and false accounting and conspiracy to defraud. And then question 8 then, the final question, is a problem question looking at murder. It's based loosely on the People DPP v Bradley, and also in that case you could use the defence of provocation. Then when it came to the October 2024 criminal law paper, the first question was 4 different people. You have to advise them on their criminal liability. This was basically a setup that went wrong. Their intent, their conspiracy to commit a crime, what actually happened, and then the kind of threats and assaults as well you would have to look at. Second question was a problem question around the usual person being detained without charge, advise on the criminal liability, and advise on the law on detention without charge and the safeguards that exist. Question 3 was a problem question around a criminal gang who had asked this woman, a criminal gang who were in an armed robbery asked this woman to store the loot basically, and she refused to cooperate initially, but she was threatened. So you'd be looking at here inchoate offences and assessing her liability but her defences as well. Then you've the 2 questions from the DPP. One is around the defence of automatism from diabetes, and then the other one then is drug use, and it kind of looks like causation. Question 5 then was a problem question around, I think it was, consent. Question 6 then was around another problem question, which was like a financial statements or fraud question. So the first one was on what criminal liability they had for Jack and Jim, and the second one was the law on bail, which we've just covered in March. Then the 7th question was a problem question, crime that occurred, but it's actually not important. What's more important is the mens rea requirements of intention in criminal law, and then the second is criminal liability for, it looks like, property damage, and then the last question then is an essay question around the classification of offences. So basically, like everything I said, is very much, every year the criminal law paper is very, very consistent. You will rarely see, something strange or something left of centre. They always follow the same routine, and I think that's why the results are pretty high. It's also just easy to remember, because it's very logical, it's very human. So yeah, those were my tips, as I said at the start. And I think the last 2 exam papers have been absolutely fine. I've seen no red flags with them at all. I hope you pass your criminal law exam in March. I'll see you in the next one.